The Lindos Mare Hotel cascades down a steep hillside, with rooms and gardens on different levels, overlooking Vliha Bay, about 4 kilometres from the town of Lindos on the island of Rhodes, the fourth largest of the Greek islands. At the lowest level is a small swimming pool, then steps lead down through a gate to a flower-lined lane. At the end of this lane are pine trees along the edge of the hotel's private beach. The town of Lindos on the east coast of Rhodes is at the bottom of a steep hill and can only be reached by shuttle bus, taxi or on foot. At the bottom of the road is a cafe overlooking Lindos Bay. The town is a labyrinth of narrow winding streets lined with shops. This is the bell tower of the Byzantine church at Panagia, which lies behind the high white wall. The Acropolis stands high above the town. The streets are only wide enough for motorbikes or donkeys, which are used as taxis. The oldest church in town, dating from the 12th century, is St George Costas. The church overlooks the main beach and harbour. Every day a fleet of passenger boats arrives from Rhodes Town, discharging hundreds of tourists into this pretty little town of just 1,500 inhabitants. The donkeys wait patiently for the ferries to unload. Around the back of the town there are more views of the Acropolis, topped by its 14th century fortress of the Knights of St John, and below it is the ancient Greek theatre carved into the rock and only recently excavated. This part of town is off the main tourist trail and has even narrower alleys between the houses. Back on the broader section is the donkey route to the Acropolis. This leads round the edge of the town and winds steadily up the hillside. At the top of the hill is the parking area for donkeys. From here there are good views down to the well-sheltered harbour. The flight of stairs leads to the medieval gate. At the foot of the staircase is a relief carving of a warship dating from 180 BC. Once through the gate, one comes to the main archaeological area of the Acropolis. The ground is very uneven and the surface polished to a high shine. From the walls at the back you can see down into the town and to the Byzantine church and tower. You can also see St Paul's Bay, which looks landlocked, but there's a break in the rocks. Inside the walls are the Temple of Athena and the Propylaea. There's also the Church of St John and remnants of a covered walkway. There's a choice of ways back down, but they all lead through the shops and cafes. Most of the cafes are on the rooftops, and some have pleasant gardens. But all serve the refreshment so desperately needed. The whole place is built on a large plug of volcanic rock. The tour of the northwest begins at the Philaremos Monastery, where there is a walk through the pines where peacocks have lived for generations. The path is lined with markers for the Stations of the Cross. Some of these carry bullet holes from the Second World War. The path ends at a view towards the airport to the right of the hill and the runway of the old airport to the left. Next stop is at a winery for tastings of wine and olive oil.
We'll continue with the dry wines. Yeah, the dry red. Yeah, the dry red.
The Valley of the Butterflies is home to moths, not butterflies, and is a canyon rather than a valley. The moths are only there at high summer, but nonetheless there are pleasant walks under the canopy of the forest alongside waterfalls and ponds. The protected Callimorpha moths feed on the resin of the storax trees, a variety of acer. The water in the dam feeds firefighting equipment throughout the forest. The ancient city of Camiros was built around 800 years BC, overlooking the sea. There are 3 levels, the lowest being the agora or market and other public areas. Above this is the residential area, laid out in a grid pattern with narrow streets for shade. The top level was the religious area. Here was also a covered reservoir with enough water for 400 families. Its position meant that citizens could see enemies approaching from the sea, but the city itself couldn't be seen from the sea. The city was destroyed twice by earthquakes, once in 226 BC and again in 146 BC. Lots of stones have been recovered, and some have footprints in which the feet of statues stood. The last stop is at St Nicholas Fundukli, a late Byzantine church with 15th century frescoes. It's surrounded by olive and oriental plane trees. Opposite the church is a fountain, where the water is particularly pure. Rhodes Town is the capital and main port of the island of Rhodes. The bus station is at one side of the market, and at the other is the Mandrake Harbour. This harbour is guarded by St Nicholas Tower and Lighthouse. At the water's edge is the Metropolitan Church of the Annunciation. The stag and hind stand at either side of the entrance to the harbour, where the Colossus of Rhodes once stood with 1 foot on each pier. The windmills were built by the Knights of St John to grind imported grain. The harbour has been in continuous use since 460 BC, first as a commercial port and now as a marina for pleasure craft and excursion boats. A 4-kilometre long wall surrounds the old town, and behind this is a dry moat, where there's a very pleasant walk. The town dates from 408 BC and is the oldest inhabited medieval town in Europe. St Anthony's Gate is one of 11 entrances to the old town. The Rolloy Clock Tower was built after an earthquake in 1851. Behind it is the Suleiman Mosque in the Turkish Quarter. The town is not laid out in a grid pattern and has 200 streets with no name, all of them lined with souvenir shops. The Palace of the Grand Master of the Knights of Rhodes is one of the few examples of Gothic architecture in Greece. It was built in the 14th century to house the administrative centre of the order. Destroyed by explosion in 1856, it was rebuilt at the end of the 1930s as the home of the commander of the occupying Italian forces. Hippocrates Square is a busy meeting place surrounded by cafes with a fountain in the centre. The Gothic Church of the Virgin of the Borough was built in the 14th century. Virgin Mary's Gate leads out into the Kelowna harbour where the larger tourist boats dock. St Paul's Gate leads back to the market and bus station. Day trips to the small island of Symi start from the Mandrake Harbour in Rhodes Town. Cruising out past the windmills, St Nicholas Tower and the Deer, the coast of Turkey soon comes into view. An hour or so later the boat nears the cliffs of Symi and follows the western shoreline to the tiny village of Panomitis. Apart from a couple of fishing boats, everything in Panomitis revolves around the monastery of Archangel Michael Panomitis. It overlooks the bay and is still inhabited by monks. This Greek Orthodox monastery was built in the early 18th century. Visitors are free to wander around the pretty gardens and balconies. After about an hour, the boat sails round the southern point of the island, past St George's Bay and up the east coast, before sailing into the picturesque Symi harbour. The boat reverses into its mooring, and then passengers are taken to the sponge shop, where the island's history of sponge diving is explained. Then they're set loose to wander around the whole town, whose population is only 2,500. All the houses in Symi are built in a Venetian style and painted in pastel colours, completely different from the white cubes which are found throughout the rest of the Greek islands. The war memorial is based on the boat carving of the Acropolis of Lindos in Rhodes. This is possibly the prettiest island in the whole of Greece.